Good morning again. The task today is to face a quite interesting topic, that means to discuss about European banking system towards the future. So the aim today is to have an idea of what is going to happen for the next future. Unfortunately, I don't have the crystal ball, so I don't know exactly if the outcomes will be correct or right, but I do believe it's interesting to brainstorm together about perspective of the banking system inside Europe. So this is the agenda for today. So 5 different topics, a very quick prelude about an idea of the frame. Second, challenges for the banking system, to focus on what are the main challenges for the banking system today in Europe. And the third, wide side of finance, the challenges for the firms, because no doubt that banking system has got a lot of challenges to face in the next future, but in the same time, also for the firms and for the corporations, many challenges on the playground. The first topic, a new player, external environment, the role of rules, because it's clear that the banking system has got to interact with the corporation system, but in the same time, the legacy, the entire group of rules can facilitate or not the exchange between the banking system and system of corporation, and some conclusions and perspectives. And this is an idea about the focus for today. I do believe that if we want to understand the banking system and to discuss about the strategy of the banking system, we have to give a look to the 5 pillars that whatever kind of bank has to manage together to design and to identify what is the strategy to position the offer of the different financial services. The 5 pillars are not ranked into a hierarchy, so I put them into a circle. The 5 of them are relevant. So we have regulation, we have customers, we have knowledge, we have capital, and we have synergies or cost income, if you want to say into another way. And the way banks used to combine the 5 pillars all together are driven, without any doubt, from the aim and from the view of the shareholders, but in the same time, the combination of the 5 pillars is driven by the ideology, the social sustainability and acceptance about the banking system. Just to give an example, if we come back to 2006 or 2005, in terms of social acceptance, a return for the shareholder of 25–30% was absolutely acceptable by the entire society. And because it was acceptable, as a consequence, the combination of these 5 pillars was driven to maximize the return of capital. Today, if we jump in 2013, I do believe that for a bank it's very hard to fix a return for the shareholder at a level of 25–30%. It's not socially acceptable today in Europe to fix this kind of return. But as a consequence, the banking system has to combine into another way the 5 pillars and to define a different strategy. But let's give a look what is the story of the banking system in Europe. So in one slide, a story probably of 30 years. If I give a look to the different countries in Europe, we can identify different waves. That means different strategic model that characterize the banking system into the different countries in Europe. If we go back to 70s, probably was relevant and dominant in many countries in Europe, the so-called institutional model of many domestic banks. If we come back to 80s and to 90s, the universal model was dominant inside the banking system in different countries in Europe. If we come back to the end of 90s, the divisional model was dominant in many countries all around Europe. It's very interesting that the 3 different models combine into a very different way the 5 pillars I mentioned before. For example, regulation. For the institutional model, probably regulation means law and order. If we come back to the concept of universal bank, regulation means liberalism. If we come back to the divisional model, probably regulation means technocracy. And the question mark is for the future. I write 2020 and I write a question mark because still today is not clear what will be the next label for the 4 pillars. What is clear is that regulation will be something ad hoc, and capital probably was a tool for the state ownership in the institutional model. It was something to diversify through the stock exchange, coming back to the universal bank. It was something to manage with efficiency and return with the divisional bank. Is something which is scarce and fine probably in the next step. And also customers, if you come back to banks as institution, localism and paternalism was the way to manage customer in the past. Coming back to universal bank, customer was a sort of new discovery and a tool for efficiency in the concept of the divisional bank, and probably for the future is something to fall in love again, which is probably the most difficult job in life, to fall in love again. Knowledge, something which is probably has to be used and to master, and as well synergies completely changed because it was not relevant in the past in the concept of bank as institution, was very relevant to create inside through a mechanism of M&A considering the universal bank, something relevant to create outside with the concept of divisional bank in which all the customers was distributed into the different divisions to generate efficiency, but probably for the future is something to find using different and multiple options. So what is very interesting is that for the future, the content of the 5 pillars probably is very clear, but what is not clear is not simply the label, which is still pending, but what is pending is also the way to combine together the 5 pillars to identify a strategic model for the future. This is the outcome of a survey we ran in SDA Bocconi 1 year ago. It's a survey that I managed together with a colleague of mine, Marcus Benzin, and the idea was to run a questionnaire with the CEO of the first 30 banks all around Europe, where the idea was to identify what will be the challenges for the future for the different banks. It's very interesting to show and to discuss about this outcome. The CEO of the most relevant banks in Europe identify 6 different challenges as relevant to define a strategy for the future for the banking system. The first one, the challenge of size, where the challenge of size doesn't mean big or small, but the issue for all the banks is the right sizing. That means to identify the right size to justify a strategic model in the market. The challenge of network, the bank is not something alone, but is something that has to connect and to interact with different institutions, with different players, with different stakeholders. The challenge of professional relationship, which is something very clear for all the investment banks in the world. A relationship has to be professional. For investment banks, probably the story is completely different. For commercial banks, where a relationship is a relationship, but to justify the concept of professional relationship, it needs a lot of efforts. It needs a lot of people working in designing the content of professional relationship. The challenge of internationalization, especially for commercial banks, that has to represent the backbone of many countries all around Europe, and probably on this issue, our country, Italy, is missing a bit. The challenge of evaluation, despite of the rating system, and the challenge of supervision. If these are the challenges for the banking system, it's interesting to identify also the challenges for the corporate system and for the system of firms. It doesn't work, I'm sorry, but challenges for firms, the wide side of finance, the challenges for firms. I do believe that if the banking system has got a lot of responsibility to identify a strategic model to deliver all financial services, in the same time also for the firms, a lot of responsibility to be managed. I do believe that in Europe, where in many countries the concept of small and medium enterprises and family firms is dominant, many challenges are on the playgrounds and probably are identified in this bullet point. The first challenge is a clear cut between finance for firms and finance for their shareholders and families, which is one of the major issues, because especially in the past for many small and medium enterprises and for family firms, there was a very complex mix between the finance of families, finance of shareholders and family of firms, and probably is necessary to disentangle the different concept of finance within SMEs and family firms. On the other way around, a clear business plan with a clear representation of the business plan itself, especially for the banking system. And the last is a strong will to accept and to learn from disciplinary pitfall of finance. I do believe that to be ready to face these different challenges is not just simply related to the idea of strategy and to design of shareholder within the family firms, but I do believe that the idea to have a good usage of finance is strongly related to values behind small and medium enterprises and values behind the concept of family firms. This is a table I really love, and sometimes I use it to discuss about many entrepreneurs, to say, okay, if you want to use a finance in a very proactive way, if you want to interact in the proper way with the banking system, it's not just simply a story of finance. It's also, and especially, is a story of the concept of ownership you want to use within your company. And exaggerating a bit, I do believe that we can divide small and medium enterprises and family firms into two very different groups. From one side, irresponsible owners, and on the other way around, on the right side, responsible owners. What's the difference? Nature of the firm. A private good for irresponsible owners and private good with public utility with responsible owners. I do believe that this concept generates a lot of differences in the usage of finance within a company. If you belong to the first group and the company is a private good, finance can be used to manage and to share wealth between the families, the shareholders, and the firms. And when the family and the shareholder has got some need, they have to extract the concept of wealth from the company, despite of the wealth of the company itself. The nature of ownership, a hereditary right in case of responsible owners, succession duty in case of responsible owners. The concept of ownership, rights and benefits, and for responsible owners, duties and risk. Also, considering goals, the concept is very different, short-term profit and short and medium-term profit. The owner's unity is natural, considering responsible owners, but is a result of an hard job for responsible owners. And last, inheritance process, which is going to involve many companies in Italy and many countries in Europe, crony and patronal for irresponsible owners, and meritocratic and respectful for responsible owners. So finance is very relevant, but is driven from the concept of responsible ownership behind the firm. Let's move to a new player, external environment and the role of rules. So the concept of strategy is relevant for bank. The concept of positioning for firms is relevant as well, but is also relevant the role of external environment and especially the impact of rules, conditioning the relationship between the banking system and the firms. Three aspects are relevant. The first one, coming back to basics. The second, the concept of virtuous network. And the last one, the role of rules. Coming back to basics, I do believe that the concept of coming back to basics is related to the fact that probably it's fundamental for the banking system to come back not to old-fashioned solution, but to come back to financial services able to satisfy the different needs of corporations. So the concept of working capital finance, the concept of investment finance, the concept of equity finance, and the concept of securities finance. Probably in the last decade, there was a mix of solutions satisfying the different needs into different ways, and now it's time to be focused again on the different areas of needs of the firms. But it's not just simply a story of coming back to basics, it's also a story of virtuous network. What's the concept of virtuous network? The concept of virtuous network is that probably banks has to become a player able to coordinate the different energies and the different money which are spread on the table, belongings to different players and to different institutions. If we give a look to the different amount of money which are at disposal of different players in Italy and in Europe is honestly impressive. Equity investors devoted to small and medium enterprises, just to discuss about statistics, if I consider a country like Italy, in Italy we have 54 vehicles belonging to regions, province, comuni, able to invest an impressive amount of money, but more or less just simply the 10% of this money are invested in small and medium enterprises. So a lot of energies, a lot of money on the table, but they are not used for the purposes of financing small and medium enterprises. On the other way around, public finance and public support. In Europe, there is an incredible wave of money coming from the public sector being used for the PPP solution, and again, a lot of energies, a lot of money on the table, as well private investors, a lot of liquidity today in Europe, which is ready to be invested, but this amount of money is not coordinated, and probably this is a duty for the banking system to be able to coordinate this incredible amount of money and energy. And last, the role of rules. Taxation, it's really a powerful tool to facilitate or not the exchange between the banking system and the firms. In these slides, I identify with some bullet point examples of good tool of taxation that can facilitate a lot the exchange between the banking system and the system of corporation. For example, incentive related to the cost of capital, selecting incentive to going public, zero taxation for startup and early growth, incentive for business angels and donors to sustain small and medium enterprises, and last, easier entrance of equity investors within bankrupt. These are good examples of taxation tools that can be used to facilitate the financing of firms. What is interesting, moving to the next table, is that into the different countries, and I add also US, there is an incredible difference in debt to equity ratio in Europe and the US as well. And you see that in Italy, the level of debt to equity is very high compared to all the other countries. A lot of debate about it. I don't want to be boring. This is a table that you can find in the website of the European Commission. What is very interesting is that this table perfectly matches with the state of the art of taxation incentive related to drive the level of debt to equity ratio. And if we move quickly to the other table in which there is the map of the different taxation incentive, it's very clear that the level of debt to equity ratio is very high in countries where all the taxation incentives are devoted to debt, and on the contrary, debt to equity ratio is very low for the countries in which all the taxation incentives are devoted to equity. Two good examples are in UK and US. I remember every time that in US, debt financing is without any incentive in terms of taxation. All the incentives are related to equity, and more or less it's the same story considering the US system. And as an outcome of this kind of strategy, the result is that debt to equity ratio is completely different. And I do believe that there is a lot of work in Europe, and especially in Italy, to design the proper tool to generate taxation incentive to drive the debt to equity ratio. Let's move to perspectives which are related to conclusions. In terms of perspectives, I do believe that the debate is related to how can we combine the 5 pillars that I mentioned in the first slide of my presentation. I do believe that combination of the 5 pillars, it's obviously a story of strategy of the different banks, but it's also related to a story of ideology and a big issue related to the concept of financial system. I do believe that we have nowadays 2 different ideas. From one side, we have an idea that the banking and the financial system is a self-sufficient, and you have to spend all the energies to design a well-functioning financial system. But on the other way around, there is another view where the bank and the financial system has to take its raison d'etre for the economic system. So the struggle is open between these 2 very different ideas all around the financial system. If we vote for the idea number 1, the rationale or the ideology is that a well-performing financial system necessarily has a positive impact on the economic and industrial system, and the payoff is efficiency. If we believe in this kind of view, probably the 5 forces has to be managed in a separate way, and we have to identify a way to generate efficiency for every force, but the 5 forces are not coordinated together. That means we have to generate efficiency on the capital, but not necessarily this efficiency is related to customer satisfaction, and not necessarily this efficiency is related to the knowledge that we have of the customers and to the concept of synergies. On the other way around, if we vote for the second solution, the rationale or the ideology again is that a well-performing financial system is the result of a strong job of knowledge, contamination, and service within and inside the economic system. The payoff is service and responsibility, probably with a lower return for shareholder. In this case, it means that the five forces has to be integrated together, and the task for the strategy of a bank is to try to coordinate the concept of capital with the concept of customers, with the concept of knowledge, regulation, and synergies. Thank you very much.